The road through the mountains is known for its challenging curves and breathtaking views. As we continued our journey, the excitement of the trip filled the car. The children were laughing and we were all chatting happily. However, the weather began to change unexpectedly. The sky darkened and a light rain started to fall. We paid it little mind, thinking it was just a passing shower. As we drove further into the mountains, the rain intensified, making the road slick and visibility more challenging. I focused on driving carefully, ensuring the safety of my family. Despite the conditions, we were making good time. The kids had fallen asleep, and the car was filled with a peaceful silence, only interrupted by the sound of the rain hitting the windshield. Suddenly, as we approached a particularly sharp bend, the rain became a torrential downpour. The road was now a river of water, and I felt the tires struggle for grip. My heart raced as I realized the potential danger, but I remained calm, reducing speed and navigating the curves with caution. The atmosphere inside the car shifted from relaxed to tense. My wife, sensing the change, looked at me with concern. I reassured her with a smile, though inside, I was acutely aware of the responsibility on my shoulders. We were in the heart of the mountains, far from any help, and it was up to me to get us through safely. However, I must confess that in my haste, I acted recklessly and made a series of mistakes, one after another. The first occurred just minutes after resuming our journey. As we started entering the mountains, we saw a traffic sign that read winding curves 40 kilometers per hour. I asked my wife what it meant, as I was unfamiliar with the term winding, but she didn't know either, so we continued without taking the suggested precautions. Once in the mountains, the road became very narrow and was two-way. It barely accommodated two vehicles, with no shoulder or room to pull over. Overconfident, I drove at 80 kilometers per hour, twice the suggested speed. It was getting dark. It seemed like it had rained heavily just minutes before. The asphalt was very wet, and I soon realized it was also very slippery. At that moment, I didn't think 80 kilometers per hour was too fast, so I maintained that speed. The curves began to tighten, and to avoid veering off, I opted to encroach slightly into the opposite lane. Unfortunately, I wasn't the only one who thought to do this. Coming out of a very tight curve, I saw a truck heading straight towards us, also encroaching slightly into our lane, and just centimeters from a collision we both swerved, thankfully in the direction of our respective lanes. We narrowly avoided a head-on crash. However, we did brush against each other. I know because he managed to hit a corner of my truck and a piece of plastic flew off. I skidded a bit, but thankfully I was able to control the truck and continued onward. But in the rearview mirror, I saw that the other truck, a pickup type, had people in the back. It completely destabilized and skidded from braking so hard. Fortunately, it didn't veer off the road or overturn. It only ended up partially blocking the road. Everyone in my truck screamed from the fright we experienced. My wife thought the people in the other truck had indeed crashed and panicked. She insisted we call emergency services, but also that we should leave, urging me to accelerate and not stop for anything, as we were at fault and would be in serious trouble if caught. I was very shaken, scared, nervous. I didn't know what to do and panicked. Not thinking clearly, I listened to my wife. I accelerated even more, increasing speed abruptly. It's important to clarify that this was a grave mistake. I should never have done that. It was very reckless. With the speedometer needle exceeding 100 kilometers per hour, my pulse racing, and hands trembling, we approached the next sharp curve. In the middle of the curve, I realized we were going too fast. It was so tight that it felt like a hairpin turn. I panicked when I realized we were going to skid off the road, so I slammed on the brakes. But the high speed and wet surface were a terrible combination, and I lost control of the truck. We started to skid and spin on our axis. The wheels were barely gripping the ground. On our left was the hillside and on our right was the cliff. If we went off the road, it would mean crashing into the hill or, in the worst-case scenario, flying off the cliff, as there was nothing but a few trees to stop us. To stop skidding and try to regain control of the truck, I eased off the brakes slightly. At that moment, the vehicle veered straight toward the cliff. In those split seconds, many things happened. I experienced everything in slow motion. I braked again, but we continued on the same trajectory. My family screamed. I thought it was the end, that we were going to die, as falling would mean certain death. I closed my eyes and lowered my head, bracing for the worst. But suddenly, we hit something. It felt and sounded like a solid thud. The truck stopped. I opened my eyes. I knew we hadn't rolled over. but initially I couldn't see anything. Everything around was a haze of smoke and dust. I asked my family if they were okay and they all said yes. They had minor bruises, but we were all safe and sound. I got out of the truck to see what had happened and I couldn't believe what I saw. We were off the road, beside the curve, in a small space barely big enough for the truck, and believe me, I'm not exaggerating, but we were just a few centimeters from the cliff. Part of the right side tires was practically hanging in the air. I told my wife and family not to move abruptly and not to open the doors on that side, as the edge's soil could shift. At that moment, a car coming from the opposite direction passed by. It was an elderly couple. They stopped and asked if we were okay or needed help, and I said yes. They managed to stop nearby, in a place where they could be seen from a distance and no one would crash into them. The man got out and asked what had happened, whether we had gone off the road or had stopped there on purpose. I told him we had narrowly avoided an accident, but something had stopped us abruptly. I was disoriented and very scared. I really didn't know what had happened. All I could see was dust. Suddenly, the man spoke to me and pointed beneath the truck. He told me to take a look, and when I bent down, I saw we were on top of a large rock. Analyzing the drag mark, we realized we had picked up that rock from underneath before leaving the road. It was a miracle. That large rock lifted the rear wheels, preventing them from skidding further, and it was the same rock that stopped us when it got dragged along. Additionally, a pipe buried in the curve as a protective measure had burst the tire, also helping to stop us. I was still very scared, agitated, and nervous. The man opened the left side doors and helped me carefully get my family out. Fortunately, everyone was fine, just as scared and nervous as I was, but all safe. The man said we needed to get the truck off that big rock. Carefully, he and I would have to push it from the front to move it backward while my wife steered the wheel. My mother and sister went to either end of the curve to signal with flashlights and a cloth, so approaching vehicles would slow down and avoid hitting us. The man and I started pushing the truck. At first, it was very stuck and heavy, but after a moment, it became much lighter. I assumed we had dislodged it from the rock. After several attempts and maneuvers, we managed to free the truck and immediately contacted my family waiting for us in Tamazunchale to tell them we had a minor accident and to see if they could come to help us, as we needed a jack to change the burst tire. They were a bit alarmed, but we explained that we were all okay. After a few minutes, we were all more relaxed, practically just waiting for our relatives to arrive to assist us. Then, the wife of the man who helped me push the truck got out of her car and approached us to ask if there was anything else they could help us with. We thanked her and said everything was fine. We started talking and she mentioned how lucky we were that the rock was in that exact spot and managed to stop the truck. I agreed, saying we were indeed very lucky. The rock was very stuck and her husband and I had a hard time pushing the truck and dislodging it. At that moment, she asked where the other man who helped us push the truck had gone, to which her husband and I were surprised, as it had only been him and me pushing it. Her husband chuckled a bit and said she was imagining things, confirming it was just the two of us pushing from opposite corners of the truck. However, the woman stood firm in her account. She insisted that we were struggling to move the truck until a man appeared from behind it and helped us push, and with his assistance we managed to get it off the rock. She described him as a tall man dressed in white. But that couldn't be possible. None of us saw him at any point, and it would have been impossible not to notice someone, especially dressed so conspicuously. Due to her insistence, I started to circle the truck, confused. Perhaps there really was someone else helping us that we hadn't seen before, but I searched around and found no one. However, I did discover something we hadn't noticed earlier. A few meters away beside the truck, there was a cross, a sign that someone had died at that very curve. The name engraved on it belonged to a man. I was contemplating what might have happened when my family arrived to help us. We quickly changed the burst tire and continued cautiously on our way to Tamazunchale. But, of course, not without first expressing our deep gratitude to the couple who stopped to help us and insisting they accept a small financial token of appreciation. Back at my relative's house, we all discussed what had happened. As we delved into the details, we began talking about the man in white the woman had seen. We concluded that it was all very strange and undoubtedly a miracle, considering the odds of surviving such an ordeal were truly 1 in a million. Given the speed we were traveling and the fact that we were spinning out of control, we were sure to go over the cliff if not for that rock. However, what was that rock doing in the middle of the road? Any other car would have crashed because of it, but in our case it stopped us. And how did it get lodged in the exact spot to halt the truck? When did we hit the metal pipe that burst the tire, which also helped stop us? We concluded there was no doubt. It was all a miracle, and somehow we understood that the person who helped us free the truck from the rock was a being of light, most likely the soul of the man who had previously died at that curve, to whom the cross beside the road belonged. There was nothing more for us to investigate. God did not want something fatal to happen that day, and thanks to him, we never stopped receiving help at every moment. Another curious thing that happened was that our family told us that in that part of the mountains, there is almost no signal, but we had no problems calling them and asking for help. If anyone is curious to know the exact location where this happened, that curve is located in the Huasteca Potosina region, before reaching Tamazunchale in the state of San Luis Potosí, exactly at the height of the viewpoint or balcony. I believe that's what they call that place. To conclude my story, I want to say that we stayed for several days at my relative's house. On our way back, we stopped at the same place where we almost fell off the cliff. We visited the cross to leave some flowers, a candle, prayers, and our deepest gratitude for helping us survive. Sincerely, it is very moving to know that this man helped us avoid the same fate he had.